I'm JinJa Birkenbeuel.
And I'm Esther, Ikoro, and we're the hosts of the Honest Field Guide podcast.
Entrepreneurship is no joke. The journey is full of anticipation, failure, hope, and disappointment. You'll make money and be totally broke at the same time.
The Honest Field Guide podcast tells you the truth.
We know being an entrepreneur is crazy hard, and you will sometimes cry at dinner. Listen in to be inspired, laugh, and learn how to really thrive on your business journey.
Today on the Honest Field Guide podcast, Help Yourself, the state of self-help and motivation for entrepreneurs and small business owners.
Motivation and self-help are two different things to me.
Absolutely.
So I don't think that
But they go hand in hand.
I think they go hand in hand. Sure. Yeah. I mean, you could be motivated to continue to read self-help books and not actually do anything.
Well, I'm saying motivation because motivation fits into that category. Self-help can mean a lot of things. Motivation is under the category of self-help to me. Mm-hmm. Self-help is the umbrella term. Mm-hmm. People deal with motivation, weight loss, motivation for weight loss, motivation for it pursuing their ideas and dreams. Some people struggle with lack of motivation. Some people just need strategies to get somewhere. Some people need to actually help themselves want to get to the place that they actually want to be.
So you're going to have to help me define
this.
Because I am a person that does not have lack of motivation. So
No.
I struggle myself with people that have none. And I have to check myself sometimes because it's like a foreign entity, a foreign language. It's like a foreign being in front of me that doesn't have motivation.
You're a business owner and you own a pretty active business.
Mm-hmm.
Those people usually don't struggle with what we perceive as motivation. A writer like Mel Robbins, for instance, she says that motivation is garbage. Like it's not something that is necessary to get things done, because motivation is nice to have, but it doesn't always consistently show up when you need it. You have a lot to say about this topic. Most of it is not positive. I once read a quote by an Olympic runner, and someone asked him, like, what do you like about training? And he was like, nothing. I hate it.
Yeah.
It sucks all the time.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
that doesn't have anything to do with how much I do it and when I do it and all of that. So I think when we talk about motivation, we talk about it as this like nebulous thing that just falls almost like creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Like creativity is great when you feel like inspired, but you can't build a creative career off of inspiration alone. You have to like do things when you need to do them.
I mean, Muhammad Ali talks about, how he hates practicing. He always talked about that, but he knows that by practicing,
Mm-hmm.
He could win,
Mm-hmm.
By training. So,
Gotta sharpen your sword.
I mean, lack of helping yourself is what we're kind of talking about because of the over-reliance on self-help books. And, it's like what we talked about the last workshop, where you can be watching the cooking shows and you feel like you're cooking, but you're really not. You're just like, I'm going to do this. And then you can't execute.
You got all the pieces, but something just isn't turning over. You ever seen that movie Failure to Launch?
No, but I heard of it.
Oh, yeah. So that's kind of what it is. It's like...
Wait, what's Failure to Launch again? What is it?
The movie?
Yeah, what is it again?
It's got that white guy in it that's always like this.
Yeah, but is it a
It's a rom-com.
Okay.
So basically what happens is that this mother and father have a son who's like in his 30s and he hasn't left the house.
Yeah.
And so they hire a woman who's actually a life coach.
Yeah.
But
I need a life coach.
She pretends to fall in love with him.
Mm-hmm.
And from the perspective of romance and his girlfriend, motivates him to get his life together.
Okay. Gotcha.
That's her angle of getting people to do stuff, is say like, she boosted his confidence by falling in love with him and being this da-da-da-da. And, of course, because it's a rom-com, they actually fall in love and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And then he finds out and he just like, is this real? And, she has her whole apologizing scene. But...
And it wasn't real, though.
Well, she actually fell in love with him.
She did in the end.
Yeah, because it's a movie.
Right. It's got a Hollywood ending.
In real life, it'd be like, I'm actually your therapist. Please put your clothes back on.
I mean, I feel like, when you talk about, life coaches, I think my question always becomes, when do you decide that it's time to have a life coach? At what point do you realize that you absolutely cannot continue unless you get some outside intervention? And this is not therapy.
Well,
this is someone to help you.
Someone that's like
tactical for you.
These are the things you said you were going to do, and you did like one of them.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing.
And that's very different from it. That's very different from a mentor and very different from an advisor. This is someone who has a single job to keep you on track
and to make you, or to help you get to the next level.
Right.
So everyday people don't think about coaching like that. But really high-powered executives, athletes, like those types of people think about that all the time.
Yeah.
I know, because I spent a lot of time listening to them talking about it.
Yeah, I know. So when do you decide that it's time to actually have a coach? I mean, because I've had conversations with entrepreneurs that are considering hiring a coach because they have the idea, they believe they have the motivation, they think they have a great idea, but they're just not able to, get to the next step, and maybe they just need someone to keep pushing them. What about if you have a business though that you're working on and you feel like you've done a lot of the groundwork and, you really do need someone to help you get to whatever the next step is, or help you continue, or help you see things you can't see. I mean, is that someone that you bring in because you're losing steam or because you're close to launching, but you just can't get there? Or is it
Both.
Someone that is kind of just in the background saying, rah, 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 keep going? I mean, at what point is it?
Rah, 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 keep going is for your friends, family, and your like significant other.
Okay.
People who have plateaued, one, and then people who are trying to get to the next level.
Okay. I love the plateau conversation, because that to me is when I think about, my children who are in sports and they get to a certain point where they can't get over a hump anymore. For example, they can't drop their time in swimming, right? Or, they're, at another level of soccer or something, and they can't figure out how to convert, when they're in the field. They've just reached a point where they can't make a difference. And so that's, the idea of plateauing, when you're like, I've done everything I can do and I need someone to give me some specific tactics, is really important. Because, I feel like sometimes you do lose your motivation. Even if you're an extremely motivated person like I am, you get to a point when you're thinking, I feel like I should just give up this. I should just stop this. This is just getting way, way too much. And it's not working. I'm hitting my head against a wall.
When you first start anything, it's great. You're like, I'm killing it. Walking around, arms pumping in the air. It's great. But then when you actually get to that middle part of just doing it, it gets boring really quickly. It gets taxing really quickly. Even in owning your business, like, let's say between getting like huge deals and clients and things like that, you have a part where you're operating the business.
The minutia.
Yeah. The minutia. Yeah. You're operating it. You're
non-glamorous part.
The non-glamorous part. Nobody ever talks about it, but those are the parts at which people fall off.
Yeah.
Because when they think about a business, they don't think about, keeping all your receipts so you can give them to your accountant.
It can get to be a grind, and at some point you have to get into a rhythm of, something that you're always going to be doing all the time. You have to get into a rhythm and create a pattern for yourself around that, because you will lose steam for sure.
Yeah.
You absolutely will lose steam around that.
And even people who aren't in charge of doing things like keeping track of the funds and things like that, even if you're at the most high level, there's always minutia. No one's job is exciting all the time.
Right.
Nobody.
My job is.
No, it's not.
I'm always excited. I'm always motivated.
Always excited.
Listening to people motivate you and reading books and listening to podcasts like ours and getting ideas and tips and, watching, Gary Vee and just getting snippets to keep you going forward. At what point does it become you're not executing and you're not doing and you're just spending so much time, learning, and you just need, so at some point you're like, yeah, stop learning and start doing. And how do you get that? How do you get that to that place where I'm going to stop learning? I'm going to turn off the TV. I'm going to shut off YouTube. I'm going to close the self-help book, and I'm just going to write some things down, put it on a spreadsheet, and start executing. And sometimes it's even hard to do that because the thought, it's daunting. You need motivation to do that. Lack of motivation when you're an entrepreneur does spring up in very interesting ways and at surprising times. You never know when it's going to happen. I mean, I don't want to say it's like depression, but it kind of is.
It happens when I open my eyes in the morning. I'm like, here it is. Yay. What?
I mean, it kind of is. You never know when it's coming. You never know when it's going to hit you. And that sometimes, overlaps into the burnout world too, where you start realizing you don't have the motivation, but maybe you're really burned out. I mean, how do you decide? How do you determine what this is? Is it lack of motivation or is it burned out? And it depends on where you are in your business journey, right? If you're just starting up, it might be just daunting and you're like, oh my gosh, I have so much to do. It's like when we've had the Google Digital Coaches workshops and there's people that are sitting there sometimes in the audience, deer in the headlights thinking, I had no idea that I had to do this much to launch.
Yeah.
And that kind of can put the brakes on what you're doing right off the bat. You'll be like, you know what? I am not motivated to do all that. I need to just go and get a job. And so for me, everyone is not going to be extremely motivated. And you have to kind of, work through that. And I have to pull myself back sometimes, which is really hard for me, as you know.
Yeah, I know. There are several things that go into motivation. I mean, if we want to get down to the chemicals, is dopamine, right? Mm-hmm. So people who struggle with depression, one of the hallmarks is lack of motivation.
Right.
So when I'm talking about motivation right now, when we're talking about on the podcast, it's almost not about that magical feeling you get when you really want to like rearrange your closet or like paint a picture. Not that. When I talk about motivation, I mean like this is from a very tactical perspective. Like how do you get yourself to do the things that you need to do? Mm-hmm. That's it.
Right.
Because the brain is an organ. Like we're creatures that react to stimuli. That's it. Mm-hmm. Everything you feel, from your motivation to triumph to failure to hunger and it's all chemical reactions. There's a whole, school of thought around psychology, cognitive behavior therapy, that think that by feeding yourself certain types of thought and recognizing your thought patterns, the way you go about solving problems, the way you react to situations, understanding how you solve or deal with certain situations, you can purposefully break those patterns.
Right.
And then make yourself do things.
I love it.
So it's less rah-rah and more, here are the chemicals that you're used to and that your brain feeds on that aren't really productive. Here's how to interrupt those cycles. Also, from a different perspective, it's also, here's what's possible. This is how I did it. You can do it if you follow these steps.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Ikoro.
Psych.
So I want to understand a little bit better why we're talking about self-help and motivation from your perspective.
So for me, it's really important because one of the reasons why I think the Honest Field Guide podcast is important in the first place is because when we talk about building things, when we talk about running things, we only talk about the shiny part. Like JinJa on stage with a bunch of women who are already successful. Like no one really talks about the stuff in the middle or the stuff that led up. Sure, we do the beginning heroes, journey. You leave your corporate job and you sit down, you have your business card and you come up with the name and all of a sudden here we are. But it's like, what happened in between? And then more importantly, outside of the in between, what just happens on a regular basis that's not glamorous, that is what is required to run this? What does this actually look like in practice? So that's why it's important to me to talk about motivation, because a lot of times when people get to the point of running their own business, they don't have the mental tools that are required to do things like manage people, constantly put out fires, deal with customer service. Those are things that if
or how about bill paying,
payroll, those are things that issues with vendors. There's a lot of emotional stress coming from someone who has a lot of friends that are small business owners. I see the stress that they go through. They have to think differently than the average person. The average person who comes and sits in the chair at a salon, they see like the aftermath. They don't understand the emotional toll it takes, that like you have a bride that's freaking out over here and you have to put that aside and be present for the customer that's in front of you. But you're also, so, you know, those are the type of things that make you cry at dinner.
Yeah.
Those are the type of things that if you don't prepare yourself, it will crush you, and you won't be able to bounce back and have resilience and grit. I think that being a business owner, from what I've seen, is like being an athlete. It definitely is. You work a lot of hours, a lot. So you already have like, you're tired.
You have to have a lot of stamina.
You have
a lot of stamina.
You don't sleep as much as other people sleep. And your job, because it's extremely mental, you're burning a lot of energy that doesn't seem obvious.
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of emotion that comes with owning a business. It just is. And until you're there, or if someone tells you or you're able to observe it at a close distance, you don't know what that's like. It's like that with everything. So it's about preparing yourself to have the mental tools to be able to punch back.
Yeah. I mean, motivation is different than stamina. It's really different. So motivation in some ways can come from really needing to make money, needing to take care of your family. Something happened, you know, in your business cycle that forces you to make a change. And, you know, those are the kinds of things that can create motivation for someone, an entrepreneur or a small business owner, because they have no choice. And oftentimes not having choices is fabulous for motivation, you know? So I sometimes, when I try to feel like, what do I need to motivate myself to do this thing? I think about what's the worst that could happen.
What's that quote? Scarcity is the mother of all creativity.
Yeah. I mean, I think about what is the worst that could happen if I do this, or what's the worst that could happen if I don't do this? And sometimes you have to find reasons to motivate yourself, because every single day I wake up, I'm not like, yeah, let's go do this. Like, it's not happening every day. But, you know, there's other things going on in my life when I have to make decisions and choices, and I have to sometimes create a motivating event so that I can keep moving forward. And I think that one of the things I learned from my son's swim coach, when you're a swimmer, it's a very solitary athletic experience. It's not like being on a football team where you have other teammates, you know, cheering you on, or you're working together as a collective.
Sometimes they compensate for your mistakes, and sometimes you compensate for theirs.
Right. But when you're a swimmer, you're out there on your own. So you have to create some kind of a competition somehow in your head to motivate yourself to keep swimming. Right. And a lot of times you might look at the person next to you and say, you know what, today during my 2-hour practice, I'm going to always stay 2 strokes ahead of them. And that's what you have to do to keep yourself moving forward. So I feel like for the small business owner and the entrepreneur, you know, if you don't necessarily have a natural passion or a natural inclination to be highly motivated, come up with, you know, 5 things that will motivate you. Make a false construct of things to motivate you, because otherwise you may not make it. You know, you may not be able to keep going.
Yeah. I mean, another part of that as well. So yeah, that's one side of it for me is like, what is the worst that could happen? What happens if I don't do this? But then from my experiences with certain small business owners and trying to get them to understand the importance of, say, technology, you deal with, oh, well, I'm fine with the money that I'm making right now, right? Like, if you're doing okay, if you're doing good and you are not motivated, getting to the next phase or evolution of your business, which might mean falling in line with emerging technologies and the way things are shifting, people who are comfortable and not motivated to make any sort of change, those are people that get left behind.
Well, I mean, you know, so there are situations where you don't necessarily have the vision and you are too comfortable. And that's a terrible place to be if you're an entrepreneur or you have a business for yourself. You cannot allow yourself to let that happen. You just can't, because you may not be able to see it now, but when you look around the corner, everything's going to change, or the ground might fall out underneath you, or the economy might take a turn for the worse, or you might have a life event. So that's not something that you should ever be thinking of. But I do agree that there are entrepreneurs that I notice, they're just kind of going along. And, some people can. I mean, some people have relationships they can rely on that will carry them through no matter how horribly they fail. That's not me. I've never had a life like that. I've always had to be highly motivated. I've always had to maintain an extraordinary level of stamina to keep moving forward with the work I've been doing over the last 20 plus years. So I don't really know what the answer is, because everybody has their own answer. Everybody has their own sort of process. Entrepreneurs or business owners that don't have a lot of motivation, it's possible that they don't have a real driving passion for the work that they're doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're not necessarily really feeling absolutely tingly and riled up and jazzed up about what they're working on, and so you have to notice the signs. I mean, earlier you talked about the chemical processes happening in your brain. You have to see the signs and get the signals. I don't love it. I don't care about it. And I have no passion around this. And so that's what you have to think about too when it comes to motivation.
And that's why it's important to do something that you love, because if you don't actually like the core of what you're doing, you won't be able to put up with all of the other things that come with doing anything. So let's talk about this for a second. Do you ever take a mental audit?
You need to define for me what a mental audit is, because that sounds like a highfalutin term and I don't understand it.
First of all, it's a term that I just made up.
I was going to say you did, right?
I definitely
mental
did.
audit.
It's probably
mental audit.
Probably floating out there somewhere. But for me, a mental audit, which is something that I've been doing a lot lately, is when I take some time. It's not a formal process, but it's basically mindfulness. I take time and I think, am I doing this to the best of my ability? If not, what am I doing to waste time? If I were looking at myself from a third-party perspective, what would I say about the work that I'm doing? What would I say about the process? What would I say about the habits that I'm trying to break and the ones that I'm trying to, put into place and continue to practice? What thoughts am I getting hung up on? What fears am I getting hung up on? What worries me? What am I excited about? How am I dealing with those different emotions? It's almost like, because if you just spend time doing and living and not being introspective at all, how are you ever going to improve if you don't really think about the way that you think? Right?
There's so many people that don't.
You have to think about the way that you think, because thought patterns aren't permanent, but you can't break them unless you're aware of them. Otherwise, they just rule you. So if you are a problem focused person where you're just like, this is wrong, and that's why I can't do this, you have to catch yourself doing that in the moments when you do it, and know that you're doing it, accept that you're doing it, to be able to say, I'm being problem focused and not solution focused.
Yeah. And I'm so the opposite of that, because I generally don't self-reflect enough, and I just do things, and it's a double-edged sword. I kind of think if I sometimes stood back and looked at some of the things I was doing, I might say, oh, maybe I could do this a little bit differently and have better outcomes. But sometimes for me, if I think too much, then I actually won't do. And I won't do it. I won't move forward. I lose my motivation around whatever the task is in front of me.
That's why for me, mental audits are periodic. They're not super constant. It depends. It depends on what it is. Like if I'm dealing with I always get hung up on this thing, then I will check myself, just do a mental check. What's going on? What are you thinking? Why are you thinking it? And what can you change to stop this? But mental audit is more of self-awareness, but that's not the same thing as constant self-doubt. Because self-doubt is one of the things that you would pick up in your mental audit. You would say, I'm always hesitating. Why is that?
And I think for me, and maybe this is for some other, entrepreneurs, is you do have to not care.
What do you mean?
I mean, you just have to be like, you know what? I just don't care what the consequences are. I don't have, I'm not going to let anything stop me. I've just got to get this thing done. And you just sort of go ahead and do it. And it can be a little bit impulsive. But when you are an entrepreneur or a small business owner, sometimes you literally can't think too much about things. You just have to do. You have to just do things. When you spend too much time questioning and doubting, then you will never get anything done. And you'll find yourself in a quagmire or in, a Bermuda Triangle, and you'll never get out. Mm-hmm. For real.
No, I agree.
You have to check yourself. That's the kind of mental audit that I sometimes check, which is a little different than yours, when I just have to say, oh, I'm thinking a little bit too much. Just go ahead and make this happen.
I do that too, though. But that's about recognizing that I spend a lot of time planning sometimes. And then I'm just like, you know what? We're just going to open this document and we are going to begin to type. My hands just move and there it is. One brick after the other. There was an artist, I don't remember who it was, but they said something like, if you don't feel like drawing, just go in your studio and sharpen your pencils. And
I love that idea.
In there and do. So even if I don't feel like taking pictures, I have gotten into the habit of taking my camera with me and forcing myself to take pictures, because it does something to your mind where you're now being able to wield your creativity as opposed to having it fall on you whenever it feels like it. Then you begin to think more creatively and start to see the thing that you're actually looking for in the world. I struggle a lot with the concept of achievement. I'm used to getting gold stars for stuff, right? There's a big part of me that doesn't care, but that's how I measure stuff. I have never
gotten a gold star for anything. So I just need you to know that you're the gold star one, and I've never gotten recognition in those ways, and I'm fine with that. And I think it's great. I love it that that's something that.
But that's
you
just
look
how
for.
I was raised.
And you know what? You never get a gold star in business.
Exactly.
You just
don't. But the fact of the matter is, and the reason why it's important for me to understand how I think, is that I don't even care about the recognition. I'm just so trained to say if somebody isn't telling you good job, then something's wrong.
I mean, when you have a business and you're an entrepreneur, I'm going to tell you right now that there is nothing on the planet Earth that's going to motivate you if you're expecting to get a gold star or a pat on the back, because the only thing that you should be looking at is, well, it depends on your goals.
At money. No, I'm playing.
Well, no, you're right. I mean, where are the customers? Where are your clients? Are they coming back?
Right,
I mean, that's kind of like the gold star. That's the only way to really measure your success in that way. Of course, you can always measure internal peace and internal happiness, but generally, you're not going to get anything that says, great job.
So I have had to retrain my mind in that sense to set well, of course, I always set my own goals, but to say to myself, here are my milestones, and I am satisfied with the fact that I have completed it.
Well, I love that you brought that up, because that maybe is a way to help people find their motivation, by putting down on a spreadsheet, what are your milestones and how do you, I love spreadsheets. I mean, Google Sheets is the best, not Excel. But if you put down what your own milestones are, and then you can measure where you are in that journey to that success. And you should definitely make sure the milestones are achievable. I mean, it's not different than having business goals or revenue goals. You have to have your own goals, because when you put them down, then you can decide, I'm motivated. Look at what I've done. You might not think you're motivated. When you actually go back and check off the things that you've completed, you'll realize, you know what? I'm actually way more motivated than I ever thought I was. I'm getting things done. It's just a way of keeping track of it. I was at a conference with Soledad O'Brien, former,
God, I love her.
She's the best, right? And so one of the things that she talks about with the young girls that she's coaching is put everything on paper and keep a list and cross it off. Make a list every morning and keep going down the list and cross everything off, and it'll keep you propelled forward. And that's a way to drive motivation within yourself. If you're not a naturally motivated person, if you're not naturally just sort of wake up like, I'm at it, let's go,
Wake up punching a punching bag.
Yes, wake up punching a punching bag, kickboxing, whatever it takes, I think it works, whatever.
Yeah. And that list is very helpful. I bullet journal a lot, which helps me because I like having a box to check off. And it also helps me keep track of my tasks and my projects. But there's something mentally satisfying about being like, check, this thing is done. I'm
Yeah.
a little closer. Is there such thing as too much motivation?
I do not understand that. And I already disclosed very early on that I'm highly motivated and I have a lot of stamina. I don't understand your question.
So motivation without execution is just being riled up for no reason.
Well, I get that way too.
Right. But you execute quite a bit. When I ask the question, is there such thing as too much motivation? I'm thinking about, is there such thing as being too much of a dreamer and that getting in the way of actual action? Because you do have people that sit in front of YouTube, sit in front of the TV, listen to books, read books, and they're very, very motivated. They're full of passion, but something happens where that does not translate into action. That's what I mean. Because being creatures of chemical reactions, you get a sense of satisfaction from thinking about what you're going to do. Someone said, sometimes it's better not to tell people your goals, because in saying them out loud, you receive some form of social validation that tricks your mind in some deep part of your mind into feeling like you've already accomplished that goal, because you get to talk about it and say what you will do, what you will do, what you will do. And that is patting yourself on the back. Your brain is pacified in some way because people go, oh, wow, yeah, that's a great idea. You should do that. I could totally see you doing that. You feel really good about that, but you haven't done anything.
I mean, it's great because...
That's a trap.
It's great because it reminds me of all the cooking shows on the Food Network when you're watching people make these amazing, delicious, extraordinary meals, and
you turn around and eat ramen.
And I mean, but you're watching people put the food in their mouth and they're tasting it, and they're enjoying it, and you're actually thinking like, I did that. You know, I did it
vicariously through them.
You're living vicariously, and you feel like you've made the meal, and then after you turn off the show, you know, you might get out a couple of the ingredients that were on the recipe.
And you're like, this is hard.
And then, but you might use them, and you'll do it, and you'll be like, it wasn't as good as what I saw, but you know, you'll kind of feel accomplished by it. But there is something to that where, you know, you do look around and you feel like you've actually done it, but you really haven't. You know,
that's why it's also nice to put information out there about your area of expertise. A lot of people fear that if they put out too much expert information on like plumbing or law or whatever service or good that you provide, people are like, well, that's bad for business because people have to pay for it. Most people who consume that information, whether it's in the form of a white paper, an instructional video, they're going to look at that, feel great watching you do it, and then realize that they don't have the motivation to actually go through the steps themselves and then turn around and hire you to do it.
Maybe the question, Esther, isn't, is there such a thing as too much motivation? But the question is there such a thing as too much self-help? Because we are drowning in self-help.
Well, we've always been drowning in self-help. That's why gyms, if you're opening a gym, your bread and butter comes from the fact that a lot of people buy memberships and they never use the equipment.
Yep.
So Planet Fitness can charge very little for their membership because they have a high volume of members that don't put wear and tear on their equipment.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I did not even know that, for real.
That's why gym, if everybody who bought a gym membership used the equipment, they would have to replace that equipment so often. But Planet Fitness is like, it's only $10. So it's a negligible cost that everybody signs up for in January.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because their New Year's resolution. And guess what, a tiny percentage of people actually run on that physical treadmill, but it's such a negligible amount that by volume,
right,
they have a bajillion members.
Yeah. I mean, so the point is that, you know,
are we drowning in self-help? The culture of self-help, two things. It's a double-edged sword. Because whether it's self-help, whether it's church, whether it's whatever meditation or like whatever it is, the human brain is designed to pacify you. It doesn't want you to do anything risky, but you can't grow without doing something risky. And oftentimes it's the risk of failure or the fear of failure that stops you from even trying. It's the fear of failure or the fear of all of these unknown factors that makes you go, I'll just stay home today. Right? Those are the types of things. Your mind doesn't want you to do anything new. Your mind never wants you to do anything new.
Yeah. Or you could be, like what I do sometimes when I don't want to act or I don't want to do something, I pick up one of my, books, which is telling me how to do something. For example, The Tools of the Titans is a tactical book by Tim Ferriss.
And it's really big.
It's really huge.
You can spend all day in that book.
It's perfect for the title, but there's all these tactics that I think to myself, I'm going to use this and I'm going to deploy that. I'm going to think about this. I'm going to do this, write it in my book. And it just, it makes me feel like I'm doing something, but I don't necessarily go out and actually do the things he's recommending. And it's, on the other hand, though, when I look at books like that, which are self-help, and sometimes they're really necessary for me to kickstart some motivation, right? Just to say, okay, let me just sort of, rekindle my brain a little bit. Let me restart my process. Let me see what I can be looking at to help me get myself motivated to do this task or to start this new adventure or to come up with this new idea or concept for a project. So there is a role for some of these things to play, but there is something to be said for too much of it. Yeah. Too much of it doesn't work for you. It actually works against you.
I don't think the issue is the presence of motivation material, culture, or personalities. It's the mind state of the person that's consuming it. It's like a diet. Like most diets will work. A lot of people either don't go all in on it or they do it and then they stop. That's why they don't work. Everything will work if you actually stick with it. Whatever it is, whether you do a bullet journal, whether you do whatever practice or habit, if you actually stick with it and put it into place, it'll work for you. The problem is, which one are you going to stick with? That's the issue. So it's more about the mind state of the person, because there are some people that picked up tools for Titans and they've implemented that stuff and they're off to the races. There are people people do testimonials and write in and comment in the comment section of Instagram all the time. There are people who watch Gary Vee and just based on the things he's saying has put into action and are now don't have time to watch Gary Vee anymore because they're doing the stuff. There are always going to be people who just want to watch you tell them what to do.
You bring up another good point though about Gary Vee, so I think that he's a muse for some people. He's a muse. I mean, he really is. I mean, he is somebody.
When you say muse, what do you mean?
A muse is someone that, ignites and inspires and helps you, keep generating ideas, That's a person that oftentimes is like associated with, spiritual, mystical properties to bring someone else's vision to life. It's almost like a writing partner, John Lennon and Paul McCartney, they were each of them together were muses for each other. So they couldn't actually create to the extent that they created without each other. They weren't working alone. Bob Dylan, I mean, he may have had a muse, but we don't really know who his muse was. So I feel like Gary Vee in some ways for some people, just puts a little spark out there and some people can take the spark and run with it. And other people just sit and listen and do nothing.
Yeah, until it fizzled out.
You know what I mean? Maybe there's no fizzle. They just keep listening. They just keep feeding. They just keep getting fed by what he's saying.
Their mind feels good by them living vicariously through him.
And that's totally fine. I mean, and Oprah is the same way. We talked about her last time. I mean, she's someone that keeps people motivated and keeps people going when they don't have that inner motivation themselves. And that's fine for some people. But I will say in business, that's not sustainable.
I have a quote here. It says, sometimes lack of progress masks itself as process planning and perfectionism when you're just stalling. That's what it is. Because if you're planning, you have an excuse for not doing. When you think about some of the entrepreneurs and small business owners you've worked with, what are some of their most common roadblocks and hurdles when it comes to motivation and action?
The number one roadblock that I've come across, Esther, is that the entrepreneur or the startup or the small business owner sees 50 things on their list and they become very overwhelmed quickly. And they're like, where do I start? And that's what stops them from acting, because there is so much to do. And when they see that list, they either say, I can do this, or they say, I've got to find someone to do it for me. And they may not have the money to have somebody do it for them. Or maybe they just they don't have the energy or the stamina to do what's required. You know, it's just, that's the number one roadblock that I see. There's just this, you know, where do I start? Where do I start? Can you be my mentor? You know, how do I do this? Who do I talk to? And again, it's like, it gets back to the, you know, what we talked about earlier. When you have a writer with a blank piece of paper, you have to start somewhere. You just have to write a single word on the paper, one word at a time. So you got to start tackling things one thing at a time. And that's it. Yeah.
Sometimes my most productive lists only have one thing on them.
As long as it's not too big of a thing, though. Because sometimes if it's too big.
It has to be very, like, when I get in that space of there's too much, where do I start? I pick the simplest thing and then I do it.
Yes.
I picked one, just one.
Yes.
Simplest thing was the first most simple part of this.
I love it. And that's the only way to do it.
Box next to it and then check it out.
I mean, if we had a picture right now of this podcast, you would see the pink Post-it notes that are all over my desktop.
Oh, really?
Yes. I have pink Post-it notes and they all have a bulleted list on them, and I categorize them and I bucket them according to priority and project and weeks and months. And, you know, that's how I work. And I don't have, it's like, this is my piece. I don't use a spreadsheet for this. I actually use Post-it notes.
Yeah.
I love Post-it notes. I love the bright pink, the bright blue, the bright green Post-it notes that get my attention. They stop me visually from what I'm doing. Yeah. They don't blend into my background, you know, and they're not extremely appealing color-wise. You know, they're not comforting. They're like, warning, 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 you know, and that's sometimes what I need to look at and so here's the other piece though. Sometimes I know they're on my computer and I will avoid my computer so I don't have to look at it. You don't want to look at them? I don't know. Because I know if I do.
You're like using your kids' computers and you're like, let me use your computer. I don't want to look at mine.
I mean, if I know that they're on there and I know if I go and look at my computer with the notes, I'm one of those people, and this is a double-edged sword, never put off tomorrow what you can do today. And I will literally get there and I will be trapped until I finish those tasks. Yeah. That's how I am. So,
or you just won't come home and your kid's like, where are you? And you're like, the Post-it notes are still there. They're still there looking at me.
Mom, come get the Post-it notes.
My issue is that I'll make the list and then I'll forget about the list. And I'll make another list.
Where will you put the list?
That's why I carry a journal around me now.
I carry a journal too, though, but
my journal is where my lists are at.
Okay.
That way, I know I always look at that notebook, so I can't be like, I put a Post-it note here, and then I forgot about it, and I put a coffee cup on top of it, or I forgot to look at it, and I don't remember what's on it.
So wait, so I know someone. This is funny.
I loved having daily planners in school. A planner.
I could never use a planner. You use planners? Wow.
I don't use a planner, but when I think about like being in grammar school, when they would give you that and it's like, you just write whatever it is that you need to do, just write it down here,
right, and
then go look at it later. My tiny little journal is like, whatever it is you need to do, just write it down here. And you will, whether you decide to do it today or whenever, it's here.
So
it's
I
not
know
floating off somewhere in my
know
house.
Someone that has like 5 journals.
Can't do no
seriously, listen, they have 5 journals and the first page has 3 things and the next journal has 3 things and they've not been crossed off, and this is just someone who cannot complete a task and they can't. I know, it's crazy. 3 different journals. My journal that I'm looking at right now, I have,
Are we pulling out
I have,
journals?
I'm just saying, I have about 10 more pages left and it's going to be done. I'm going to move to my next one.
Let's switch gears a little bit. One of the parts about being a business owner that you cannot avoid oftentimes, unless you're fully automated and fully outsourced, is that you have to deal with employees, which means that you have to understand what motivates other people to action.
Make sure that you are, being encouraging about work that's done well and provide constructive feedback when it hasn't been done well. I also think it's important to keep employees and staff motivated, and your consultants and your freelancers, to give them the power to make decisions. Micromanaging is the death knell of any type of relationship in any way. And that goes both ways. I don't like to be micromanaged, and I definitely don't want to be micromanaging people. So it's important to allow people the ability to make wise choices and to make mistakes. And that way people can keep themselves in check and feel trusted and feel safe and feel valued. And those are really my two top things. I'm sure there's other, larger companies, like Google, that deploy much more significant tactics like amazing, food culture, workout facilities, massages, having longer vacation days and very generous maternity and paternity leaves and things like that. But when you're a small business owner, you don't necessarily have, that kind of stretch with your company. So having, people that want to be around you and that want to work and they feel that they've made a difference and can contribute, and they walk away with work that can take them to the next level of whatever that level is, whatever they're looking for. That's what I deploy when I'm working with, outside consultants, staff, and freelancers and other entrepreneurs that help me, build my company in different places and different verticals.
How do you find out what motivates them specifically? Is that important?
I think it depends. I think it depends on the employee. Some employees just want to kind of come in and get paid and walk out. They just want to make their money and do the task, and that makes them very happy. And then there's other people that have, other goals for what they want to do with their lives. They want to learn, or they want to stretch, or they want to transition careers. I have one person I worked with for a number of years, and she was really saving money because she wanted to go to grad school, and now she's at grad school. So she was really doing work for the money that was motivating her, because her ultimate goal was to be away at school and go back and get her PhD. So it just depends on what the employee or the staff are looking for. And it's really a conversation to understand what they're trying to accomplish. Yeah. And you have to have a trusted relationship. You have to be able to be honest with each other about what's happening. That's the key, is being honest and being able to bring your real full self to the relationship. If you can't bring your full self, then, how can you possibly motivate anybody?
People talk about working with and hiring millennials. One of the things that they struggle with, especially older business owners working with younger millennial generation employees, they don't have the same motivations that those older business owners are used to dealing with in workplaces. For instance, some would say like a lot of millennials want to understand the bigger impact of what they're working on, or feel like they're doing something good or worthwhile, and all of these things that manifest themselves very differently when compared. I mean, obviously everyone wants to feel like they're doing something worthwhile. Some people just want to collect a paycheck, but it does look different. And so what it takes to motivate those employees or get them to have loyalty to your business or even your brand as consumers looks different.
I've not been one to be motivated by external events or, things that are happening around me and outside me. I've not been a person that looks for that type of validation to keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So I know for my relationships in my business world that I also look for self-motivated and self-starting individuals,
Mm-hmm.
because I think like an entrepreneur, and the people that I like around me, I like them to be thinking that way too, because we have an alignment of spirit that is very difficult to teach. It's very difficult to teach that.
Yeah.
So, and everyone doesn't have internal motivational mechanisms. And, that's why we're talking about this. If you don't have an internal drive, how do you force it? How do you create a way for you to get that? Especially when you're an entrepreneur and want to start a business, you've got to find ways to keep moving forward, because it's a very brutal experience to have a business, or to start a business, or to have an idea, or to bring a concept to life and bring it to market. It is not for the faint of anything. I mean, it's just
it's not for the faint
the
of
faint
anything.
of anything. I just want to avoid the phrase the faint of heart, but it's
not
just
for the
not.
faint of
It's not
anything.
for any kind of wilting violets.
Can't faint.
If you're relying on outside external forces to keep you moving forward, you may not make it. You may fail.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to find ways to drive yourself. You have to drive yourself. It's like when I had my first child, and I have 3 sons, and I had a whole 2 shelves worth of, how to be a parent. And at one point, my mother-in-law says, throw the books away and just be a mother, just stop with the self-help books, just do it, and it was like, what do you mean just do it? I need someone to hold my hand, but at some point, you realize, that's actually totally true.
Yeah.
There is no manual for how to, be an entrepreneur. There is no book that says this is how, you run, how you can motivate yourself and how to run a business. There's lots of great tactics.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of great tactics, and sometimes you really need them. I mean, I've got some really amazing books on sales, which talk about the psychology of sales and what's happening inside of a company that shows you the order of authority, so you can understand who's writing the check and who's the influencer to get the person to write the check, and who's the person who's just sort of staging a fake environment that has nothing to do with anything. I mean, there are things like that are helpful to know, so you can figure out, how to close deals. But outside of that kind of a space, you got to sometimes just turn off the noise and just start doing things.
Are there some pillars of motivation, habit, or behavior that you feel like everyone needs to have?
When I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs that have been doing their thing for a long time, or I talk to business owners that have had businesses for a number of years and they're not necessarily changing, they're kind of phoning it in. The question is, what is it that needs to happen for a business owner to be motivated to not phone it in anymore? Or what needs to happen for an entrepreneur who has been at this for so long and they're not, making any more money, they're not getting new clients, or maybe there's things are just starting to get stale? What are some of the ways that, these people can get some kind of motivation to change? And that's really a question of motivation to change. I always suggest, and I feel like I say this at every single podcast, and you do too, you either need to start reading books, current books, or you need to start listening to them on audio, because when you hear people, and this is more along the lines of how do you reignite motivation? How do you kickstart it? Because I'm assuming that these entrepreneurs and business owners have been motivated in the past, right? Mm-hmm. They have been motivated because they still have a business and they're still doing the work they've been doing. So it's not like they're starting and trying to figure out how to start more, or how to grow something. They're really sort of, they're on the path and nothing's been changing. And they're sort of looking around saying, something's got to change. I'm still doing okay. But I do feel like something's missing. What do you need to do? You need to start looking at some books. And this is a place where I do think there isn't too much of self-help. There's not too much of listening to Gary Vee. Whatever it takes to shock your brain and your process and your stride to get you off course a little bit, to see something different and something that needs to change. And that's a place that I think is really successful. Now for the business or the startup that is trying to start or trying to move forward and they have all these ideas on paper, that's a place where you just have to start jumping off the cliff and taking chances. And I know it's hard for some people to do that because they're not risk takers. They're not impulsive. Another thing to think about when you're an existing business owner, and you might wake up one day and say, oh my gosh, I am so tired. I've been at this for so long. I don't know if I can keep doing this. I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I've had so many conversations, Esther, with businesses like this that are just starting to wear thin and wind down, or they want to wind down. But how about this? They can't because they haven't reached their retirement goals. They haven't made enough money. They still have small children. They have a parent in the home that they have to take care of. Maybe they're in debt, whatever it takes. And I would suggest that to re-motivate yourself or to kind of kickstart a new experience with your business or something that's happening inside of you is volunteer. Go out and volunteer and start using your expertise to teach others, right? I mean, that's a great way to re-energize yourself and to make yourself feel like, you know what? I actually am doing pretty good. I'm doing pretty good out there. I'm sharing my expertise. I'm giving away my knowledge for free. I'm not charging for it. Maybe even do one-on-one coaching, potentially write a white paper that you can then release from your website, or start writing articles on LinkedIn. Anything that helps you share your knowledge, because that way you can start getting feedback and you kind of get that rush that you got when you first started a business, when you felt, look at everything I'm doing. It's great. You kind of need that chemical that sends a rush through your head when you've been in business for a long time. You need to figure out ways to, get some fresh insights and fresh movement. And one of the ways to do that is by sharing what you know with others. Esther, I would like to know, what is your pillar of motivation?
My pillar of motivation is my ultimate why. Knowing the core of the reason I'm doing anything. So my goal in life is to become the best version of myself, utilizing my gifts and my passions to be the best version of myself, because I will be the happiest I can be if I feel like I'm giving life everything I have. I'll be a better partner. I'll be a better daughter because I will be fulfilled in what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. I am feeling more and more fulfilled every day, but that's the ultimate why. The how depends on what route. I have this poster in my room. It's a history of Apple computers. And it starts off, it's this huge thing that has all of their devices, it's like this web of products that led up to and culminated to all of these things. When I was in high school, I volunteered at a nursing home. And it's really important, I think, to be very clear with yourself about what happens after some years. Because when you're 90 isn't old, right?
90?
Yeah.
90?
90.
That's almost a century. That's up there.
Okay, it is up there. No, definitely. This is coming from a person who plans on being 140 years old. So it's up there.
Okay, wow.
It's up there. They're going to have to come get me. They're like, ma'am, I'm
Esther's
nope,
I am not
a few more. They just got flying cars.
Okay, go ahead.
The greatest thing is at any moment to be willing to give up who we are in order to become all that we can be. On a day-to-day basis, I think about where I want to be in 5 years, who I want to be, what I want, not necessarily what I want to accomplish, but fulfillment. Did I do or attempt to do the things that I want to do? Because I don't want to have regret at the end of my life. when I literally maybe even physically can't do those things.
So then one of your pillars of motivation is avoidance of regret.
Avoidance of regret.
Yeah, that's a good one. That motivates a lot of people. I mean, that's actually an excellent tactic, and I'm glad you brought it up, because if nothing else, put on a piece of paper what you will regret if you die tomorrow that you didn't accomplish. Because if you put that on paper and you look at that, you'll say, man, I'm not going out like that. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I love that. That's a
for
great
me,
tactic.
The fear of not giving it a good shot. If you have a lot of potential, right, you can rest in that.
Yeah.
And the potential might be the worst thing you can have.
Right.
Because there are a lot of people with potential that are like, yeah, I was really good at this. I could have, but I didn't. It's just like, yeah, but you didn't, though. And so it doesn't matter
and
if
it's not only you didn't, but you didn't even try.
You didn't even try. And that is the worst.
Yeah.
Which is also why it's important for me to surround myself with people that are doing the things that I want to do, so that I continue to remind myself that it's possible. And those things are at the core of every day when I wake up and I'm like, I have to do this, I have to do that, this is difficult. All those process things and the long road from the first, Mac computer to the iMac, like all of those in between, learning and failing and all that stuff. That's the stuff that you have to keep your eyes on the ultimate goal.
I think those are 4 great tactics. The last one resonates with me the most, because you have to be careful of the company you keep when you're in business. So being surrounded by people that are, yes, going to champion what you're doing, yes, are going to give you constructive feedback when you're failing or when you're being successful even, being around positive forces that are not trying to step on your neck, that you can have visuals of success. And maybe you're not quite as successful, but they're not so successful that they're so distant that you'll never get there, right? So being around a tribe of people that can keep you motivated is a tremendously powerful tactic when you're in the solo entrepreneur, lonely world of a business, because you could be so internal with what you're doing that you drown and you do lose motivation. So that's an excellent, place to think about when you have a business and how to stay motivated or how to find motivation. I love that last one. That was great.
Great.
Esther, so now it's time to talk about the books that we're going to recommend. And it's so funny because this podcast is about not relying too heavily on self-help books, yet at the end of our podcast, we're recommending a few self-help books.
The first is a book by Angela Duckworth called Grit. Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance by Angela Duckworth.
Why?
Very good book because it talks about the principle of grit, which is the thing that gets you through that messy middle part. Ooh, grit is what keeps you going. And Angela Duckworth is a PhD. She has a very popular TED Talk that you should go watch. And she's taken time to study high achievers. And she looks at achievement and success and things like that and accomplishment, not through the lens of who has the most natural talent, who has the most gifts, but what is the element that helps people persevere, bounce back, which are the things that are necessary if you're going to accomplish something, because setbacks are inherent in anything that you do. And when I think about entrepreneurship, it's a bunch of setbacks, it's a bunch of hurdles, it's a bunch of fires to put out. The next one is The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins.
Oh.
And when I say 5-second rule, I'm not talking about, dropping something on the floor and picking up and eating it within 5 seconds, thinking. Which is actually disgusting. The minute it touches the floor, it's a wrap for me. But the 5-second rule is really simple. If you're trying to do something, a physical action that you just can't get yourself to do, count backwards from 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and on 1 you move. And that is a very basic strategy that is gone into in great detail in this book, but it speaks to the very core of the human mind and interrupting thought cycles or cycles of doubt. The purpose of the 5-second rule book is to get you to stop hesitating. So
excellent.
Yeah.
I love that. So I've got 2 books, and one of them I talked about earlier, Tim Ferriss, Tools of Titans, and he is an author full of very specific tactics. I love that about Tim Ferriss. He's like, this is what you need to do right now. This is how you do it. This is where you go. This is who you talk to. This is the URL. Excellent, excellent books. He's got a ton of them. He's got a great website. So I highly recommend pretty much anything by Tim Ferriss, but Tools of Titans is great because it highlights high performers, well-known people and what they've done to be successful. And we always want to look at the people that are really, really successful, as well as people that are doing really, really well, but may not be famous. But this book really does get to the heart of it. And the other book is a little bit off the side a little bit. It's by an author named Paul Hawken. It's called Growing a Business. And it used to be a PBS series. And it focuses on more of an ecosystem, natural process to grow a business. I think that it's got some lessons around the future, and it has lessons around what kinds of relationships you need to develop, what kinds of environment you need to build. And you should really look at this book. It's written more long form. It's not tactical. It's higher level. It's more big picture, and I highly recommend it. Paul Hawken is an amazingly brilliant author.
It is time for you to give your special message to Black female entrepreneurs and business owners.
Yes, and this is such an important tip. Are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
Number one tip, only tip of the podcast, and this is perfect around the discussion of motivation. Stop hanging out with your friends when you're doing business. Stop hanging out with your friends. When you are out there networking, go alone. Don't go with your friends. When you are researching for opportunities, go to events, stand by yourself, introduce yourself to people that you don't know. Be around people that don't make you feel comfortable. When you are a Black woman in business, when you're out hanging out with your girls, after hours, having food and drinks, totally fine to relax and get all of the great advice and say, yeah, this happened to me. Check this out, things like that. But when it comes to business, your friends are not good company to keep because you won't grow, you won't challenge yourself, and you need people to help you see something fresh and completely different that you haven't seen before. And I think that one of the things that holds African American women back in business is we don't necessarily take risks as much. We don't like to expose our weaknesses. We want to be appearing strong all the time. And when we're around people that we don't know, we feel weak, right? And so, but when you feel that kind of weakness, that actually makes you stronger. That's my number one tip.
Great.
That's it. That's what we've got to make happen. Got to make that happen.
Yeah. Get out of your comfort zone.
Thanks for joining us on the Honest Field Guide podcast, where we talked about
motivation, self-help, and getting things done. I'm Esther Ikoro.
And I'm JinJa Birkenbeuel.
And we'll see you next time. The Honest Field Guide podcast is produced by Birk Creative, written and created by JinJa Birkenbeuel and Esther Ikoro. The podcast is recorded in the innovation and technology capital of the Midwest, Chicago, at Stomping Ground Studios in Ukrainian Village.
Original music is written by and provided courtesy of Utah Carol. Follow Honest Field Guide on Instagram and Twitter. The opinions expressed on the Honest Field Guide are opinions only and only represent the views of JinJa Birkenbeuel and Esther Ikoro.